I will call the Brattleboro Select Board meeting of Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021 to order. There was no executive session. Let me ask Peter Elwell if the meeting has been properly warned.
Yes, it has.
Thank you very much. All right. The first order of business is to approve the minutes from October 12th and October 19th. Do we have a motion?
Actually,
Yeah, do you have discussion items?
sorry, I have a cold and it's coming through. I had one requested change, clarification in the October 19th minutes. Do you mind if I just explain that really quickly?
Please do, Tim, please do.
Thank you. If you look on page 2 of our minutes, way down at the bottom, line 45, it says, Wessel said that he is in favor of both items, but would like to see the amount of the fund reduced. He would prefer if the surplus salary savings was returned to the general fund. For clarification on that, I haven't watched it, but I'm pretty sure that I was advocating for more of the surplus salary savings. If you recall, we went with the recommendation was 200,000, and I had briefly advocated for 100,000. So I think my requested change would just be he would prefer if more of the surplus salary savings was returned to the general fund. And if I figured if that was agreeable, we could just say as
Yes.
tweaked or whatever the phrase is.
So perhaps Daniel's motion can include that change?
Yeah, I just want to check in about that. So as the clerk of the board, I review the draft minutes that are prepared by town staff person. I don't know if I want to throw Jessica on the bus. Jessica Stickler writes these minutes. After watching the meeting, I generally concur with how she presents things and sometimes suggest an odd little change here or there, although it's not very odd. I don't recall reading this and thinking, oh, that wasn't what Tim said. And I don't exactly remember what Tim said. I'm sure Tim knows better than I do what he said. So I guess I would trust him on that. But like, maybe Jessica wants to go back and look at the tape and maybe there was a misunderstanding or something. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm inclined to trust Tim's judgment about what Tim said, and if anyone,
Yeah, because I think if you don't add some words, it makes it actually read as if I don't want anything to go to the fund, depending on if you read it that way or not. So I just wanted to make it clear to anybody who wasn't there. It wasn't my position to not have the fund. It was just at a lesser amount, if you recall. But if you do, you think it's more appropriate to let Jessica have another crack?
I just honestly can't remember precisely what was said, and so I did the best I could with these draft minutes, and I know Jessica did the best she could. So I don't know. I'm sort of reluctant to change something that changes like the content of it without at least checking back on it.
well, I think what Tim said about the two sentences kind of going together would make more sense if the change was made. Because I seem to recall that he was not disinclined to vote on the fund. He just wanted a lesser amount. And if that's what we all recall, then the editing would make sense.
Right. So it says Wessel said that he is in favor of both items. That's clear, but would like to see the amount of the fund reduced. Is that inaccurate?
No, it is.
It's the next sentence that's
it's the next
problematic.
sentence. It's the next sentence.
Oh, okay. Okay, my bad. Sorry, I thought you said line 45, and that's what I was focusing on.
Well, it starts on line 45.
All right. Well, in which case, yes, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, then Daniel, can you reflect that in your motion, please?
Oh, good heavens. Tim might need to tee it up for me.
Why don't you just say as edited by Tim?
Sure.
Peter
has
has a
been-
suggestion.
I do have a suggestion. And first, if you'll indulge me, I want to make an observation that it is extremely rare that any of you finds anything in these minutes to pick at this way. It's appropriate for you to do it when you spot such a thing. But the comment I want to make is because this process we're in right now is so unusual. And that speaks to how carefully the minutes are put together and well reviewed by the clerk, the various clerks over the years, this year, Daniel. The thing I wanted to point out is that it is appropriate for you as a board reviewing your minutes and making sure that they accurately reflect the meetings you've held, either to do as you're doing right now, where there's enough clarity that you feel comfortable that, yes, you recall what happened there, and this does better reflect the reality of what happened, or to rely on going back to actually, listening to it or watching it again to make sure that we get it right. And so depending on the complexity of a conversation like this on some future occasion, I just wanted to make the point that there wasn't a right and wrong on that thing that you were wrestling with a minute ago. It's entirely appropriate for you to proceed with this tonight because it's straightforward. And it would have been equally appropriate if you had lingering concerns to just defer this one till the next meeting and have Jessica check the tape. Having said that, I think your motion is to approve the October 12th minutes as presented and the October 19th minutes with the modification at line 46 as discussed by the board.
So moved.
All right. All in favor of the motion to approve the minutes of October 12th as presented and October 19th as modified, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. That has carried 5-0. And we are off to chair's remarks. I have none. How about manager's comments?
I do have brief comments this evening on behalf of Jessica Stickler, actually, who asked me this afternoon to remind everyone out there who is considering applying for human services funding through the RTM process this year, that the deadline for submitting those applications is 5 p.m. the next Tuesday, a week from tonight, November 9th. And they are to be directed to her at J Stickler, that's JSTICKLOR at brattleboro.org. That's also been pushed out into the community a number of different ways. The Human Services Committee of the Representative Town Meeting will be meeting after the November 9th deadline to review the applications and make recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there select board members who have comments they would like to make at this time? Daniel?
Thanks. I'm in my Sevka office today. It's beautiful, well lit. The walls are a delightful shade of yellow. And we got a piece of information earlier in the week from the state about a new benefits program that will be very helpful to people in the town. It is modeled on the state's fuel assistance program, where like at the beginning of each heating season, people who qualify get a certain amount of benefit that's then used to get fuel. This is for water customers. It's going to be called, it's not going to be called, it is called Household Water Assistance. It's as simple as that. And for families that qualify, there's a very simple application on the dcf.vermont.gov website. You go to dcf.vermont.gov/benefits, and then you'll see water assistance. And it's a 2-page application. The income guidelines are more generous than the guidelines for 3 Squares Vermont and fuel assistance. So chances are many Brattleboro households will qualify. If you have an overdue balance on your water and sewer bill, or you are a household that finds itself at times struggling to pay the water and sewer bill, it's likely you would be eligible for assistance, and a payment would be made to the account through the state. This is not a COVID program. It's coming out of new federal funding. It's never been done before, but it's not a you must have a COVID impact. It's simply just, are you income eligible? It's what we would call an entitlement program. And many households in Brattleboro would benefit from it. The town will benefit because we need that utility revenue, and the rest of the ratepayers benefit because then it's more equitably spread throughout the town. So dcf.vermont.gov/benefits, and the program is called Water Assistance. I believe a press release went out on Friday. I have yet to see it in the newspaper, the evening newspaper. That is all.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Are there other select board members who would like to make a comment at this time? Ian.
Yeah, just a quick committee report. The Board of Civil Authority met last week, and Liz and Tim were both there as well. But I'll just speak from my perspective. Doing some really interesting stuff. Both the legislative reapportionment of legislative districts is happening. It's every 10 years with the census. So it goes from LAB, the legislative apportionment board, thank you, to the boards of civil authority across the state to then either approve or give feedback on, and then it goes back to the legislature. So we're in the middle of that process right now. And then also giving some clarity to Hillary Francis, the town clerk, on some not post-COVID, but from COVID, some changes to the election process for some clarity on movement of people through the poll station and things like that. So really good work, and it's, as always, a real pleasure to sit on that board. So and that process is not over yet on the reapportionment. And we will meet again next week. I don't actually think a day has been warned yet, but if anyone is interested to attend and watch, I would encourage them to participate.
And if they wonder about the date, they can always call him.
Yeah, and I'm sure, and it will be posted when it is, when we do have the date, just like it always they are.
Thank you, Ian. Yes, those meetings are fun. Anyone else?
No, not at this time.
Thank you. All right, then. Public participation. Is there anyone in the public who would like to speak on an item that is not on our agenda this evening? All right. Let's see. I see 2 hands. Kurt, would you like to join us?
Yes, I would, please. Hi, everybody. I'm Kurt Dimes. I live in Brattleboro, and I'm pretty upset about the climate conference. The scientists, but people got to keep in mind, scientists don't just say that there is a climate crisis. They're saying that we need unprecedented, dramatic, revolutionary, that kind of word they use, unprecedented immediate action, or to prevent doom in a few years. And they're also saying now something's new, that it's not the climate itself so much that's upsetting young people, it's the fact that people aren't doing anything about it. And And they say that children around the world are feeling betrayed by their governments and by their adults. And now the holiday crisis is coming, so we're all going to be fussing about the holiday crisis and Christmas crisis, and people are going to be buying millions of things, and they won't have money and they won't have time. And I think we really got to settle down and talk about it. So I think we got to have people talking about it, getting together with their families. So on Thanksgiving, I say everybody ought to talk with your families. Talk with your families about the crisis and get ready to prepare. That's one way we got to change. I've seen people changing, especially Tim. I've seen you change. You used to glass over when I would talk about climate issues, and the last time I talk about it, I noticed your face is different. And when I talked about the climate emergency fund, I saw your face change. I thought you were thinking about your little boy. So that's just what I want to say. Everybody's got to get together and talk and not deny it, not put it away, not pretend it's not happening. Not knowing what to do is not an option. Maybe you can convene the RTM, but at least people got to talk about it. Set a day on the holidays. On Thanksgiving Day, everybody talk with your family about the climate, and maybe we can get something going. I guess that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. Appreciate it. Alex, would you like to join us?
Hi everyone. Happy Tuesday meeting. I have more of a question, and I never know if this is the right format. So the question is just, comment of excited about the fund that is recently created for community safety, and curious what any sort of timeline or process around how and when those monies are available and who they're available to. I've just been hearing some folks be stressed out about not knowing if they should be like rushing to get ideas in or if there's a timeline. So I don't know if you can comment on that, but that is my comment, that folks would love to know what's going on, how to apply, when, and making sure that it's very open and clear around those guidelines. So it's not just a first come, first serve situation.
Peter, would you like to say a few words about that?
Sure. At the time that I proposed the creation of this a couple of weeks back, I indicated that I anticipated proposing some additional funding in the upcoming budget. And in fact, in the budget that we'll begin talking about tonight, there's an additional $100,000 proposed for the fund. And the intention of creating the fund and having discussion around the potential additional funding through the FY23 budget is to sort of firmly establish the commitment to support for alternative ways of creating greater safety in the community, without so far a specific definition either to like criteria by which something would qualify for receiving those funds, or a particular process by which the select board would make decisions. My expectation, but honestly, the urgency that I felt was to address the need and a method for setting aside the funds without being specific about the process, but with the expectation that there would be discussion of the process before any funds would actually be distributed. The funds will be distributed at the discretion of the select board, but similar to a kind of, it's not exactly a parallel fund, but an earlier created fund of this type that was created earlier this year with $70,000 for fossil fuel free facilities. What happened then was the money was set aside, and then the board later considered the parameters within which it would make allocations. It has not yet made an allocation from that fund, but the rules became clear as the step forward. And that's what I would expect with this. honestly, I haven't given further thought to the specific timing of that. I'm not sure if the board members have at all. We're diving into budget now, and we have a new town manager arriving December 6th. And I think somewhere in the course of, my remaining time as town manager and Yoshi's arrival and, becoming, taking the baton, somewhere over the course of this next couple of months, I would imagine that we will have further discussion about that process, and the details will become more clear.
That is super. And just to clarify, there's 200,000 to be dispersed before June 30th, 2022, and then the additional amount that's being talked about.
Not
No.
exactly, Peter.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm sorry, but by creating this separate fund, we're able to set aside the funds for this purpose. That's why we wanted to make sure that there was the first allocation from the current year's budget, kind of tied together with the issue of the collective bargaining agreements and the funding for the police officers' raises. And so we wanted to make sure that at that moment, recognizing the what would otherwise become surplus and fall to fund balance at the end of the year, that we seized that opportunity to take the that $200,000 and set it aside and create the fund.
okay.
What'll be before the select board now and the consideration over the next several weeks on the FY23 budget is whether to send on to representative town meeting a recommendation that $100,000 more next July go into the fund.
Got it.
And then there would be a total of $300,000 available to allocate.
Okay, this is all super helpful. Thank you. So just y'all are gonna keep us in the loop around what the process is gonna be, and we're gonna hear tonight a little bit more about more money going in. I think, yeah, just that's the thing that I've been hearing people stress about is process and applying for the money and being clear on what the like priorities and ways of dispersing that money are. So it sounds like it's not figured out. And would also just publicly comment that a lot of us in the community would love to be a part of supporting figuring that out. So if y'all want help on that, to reach out for help and support on figuring out some of those ways of creating guidelines on how to disperse the funds.
Thank you, Alex. Tim?
I was just going to say, would this sort of checking back in with all of our community coincide with, didn't we have a December additional report set?
Yeah, that's actually a good point and might be a good focus for when the board would, begin to consider the process by which you will allocate funds, since there'll be an evening that we'll dedicate sometime in December to the check-in on community safety. We don't have a specific date for that yet, so unfortunately, that's another at this moment a bit of uncertainty. But I would say to those in the community who are keenly interested in these issues, there will be lots of advance notice of which evening in December we're going to have that meeting, and I do think that's a good suggestion that it's squarely within the parameters of that issue. It's in fact intended to provide a means by which the select board can provide tangible support to good ideas for alternatives. So,
Great.
Thank you. All right.
Daniel has a hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, please, Daniel.
I just want to voice my support for, let's get a date for that meeting. I didn't realize that we didn't actually have a date set for it. So can we please get that sorted in the next week or so, especially with holiday schedules, my multi-city trip that I'm sure to take.
That's a little COVID joke. Ha
Yeah, it's hilarious.
All right. Are anyone else from the select board have a comment to make at this time? Oh, I did that already. Okay. Consent agenda. We have 3 items on the consent agenda. And the full backup is, of course, in our packages and open to the public. One is a VCDP grant for zoning bylaw modernization. One is the Edward Byrne Memorial Justice Assistance Grant. And the last is the Nelson Withington Skate Facility. Is there anyone who would like to make a motion for this consent agenda? Yes, Ian.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
All select board members in favor of approving the consent agenda as presented, please raise your hand. Say aye.
Aye.
Great, 5-0. All right, unfinished business. COVID, the continued consideration of hybrid select board meeting protocols. I would keep the status quo unless someone member of the select board would like to discuss it further this evening. Daniel.
Thanks. It was interesting to read my thoughts in Vermont Digger the other day. I bumped into Kevin outside the post office just earlier this afternoon. Had a little chat about that. Those are the thoughts of a person who is tired at the end of a meeting, a little unfiltered, perhaps. But I want to kind of reframe where I'm at with Zoom meetings right now. Because the last time we spoke about it, I think that there was I'll speak for myself. I thought that, Liz, you were largely in favor of us remaining on Zoom because of a concern about safety for yourself, if I'm honest, and more broadly for the community. And then in the course of that conversation, you said that you weren't too worried about yourself, really. It was more about the community, which I get. And so I just want to speak up for my own needs around how we meet right now. And I know that everyone else in the community is making decisions about what their tolerance for risk is, what safety looks like for them, and what they're willing and not willing to do right now. And they're making those decisions every single day when they send their kids to school, when they go to a place, when they eat a meal indoors, when they go to watch a movie or something like that. And so for me, I cannot really be honest and say, I'm okay with continuing to meet on Zoom on this board. I need to be in person, in a room with at least the people I can see on the screen right now. As we think about our $20 million budget, as we wrestle with questions of community safety, and as we continue to do the business of the people, I would like to be more accessible. I would like to be able to relate to you all in ways that is beyond the two-dimensional, like this whole thing is not working for me. It makes me feel disconnected from you all, makes me feel isolated. Honestly, last week made me feel kind of crappy. And so I trust, because we have a hybrid meeting setup right now, which is great, I trust that members of the community will participate in the meeting in a way that feels safe for them. But I would like us as a board to meet in person. And that is what I want. And I'm happy to hear what other people want, but I need to speak up for myself, because otherwise I would be doing myself a disservice.
Thank you, Daniel. Anyone else like to comment?
Well, no one else. So I'll admit that I am pretty much of the same mind as Daniel, with my special, and bringing it around to speaking of ourselves and our own needs. My special reason I tend to be on the fence is sometimes I'm one of those people that really helps me to see a full face. And ironically, in person, I can't see full faces. But on the grand scheme of things, I am in favor of in-person board meetings. And I think the very creative and helpful suggestion that came from town staff to try out a meeting or two at the fire station might be something to try, because people might be more comfortable there. with HVAC systems and size of room, etc. But I'm sort of on Team Daniel on this one. So I think this is, it's I see a lot of people really struggling with it and moving back to some normalcy and taking a little extra personal risk. And I see other boards and committees meeting in person. And I think we should do it.
Anyone else like to weigh in?
I guess if nobody wants to weigh in, I just make a motion and we can vote on it, and then that way you can all weigh in.
No.
But if you want to talk about it,
No, that's okay.
fine.
I'll weigh in. It's all well and good that, we take care of ourselves and want to do, the right thing. And I'm very concerned because our governor does not seem to recognize the risk, and the numbers are high and people are dying. And we're not in the same situation that we were in June and July. I can read charts and they're bad. And I don't want to put anyone at risk now, especially as we're heading into holidays when people need to be together for other reasons. And, no one's screening members of the public who would come to a meeting. No one's taking their temperature, asking for their vaccination card. It's open to the public. And, people might go to a restaurant or a theater or something, and like the Stone Church, you show your vaccination card, you eat outside, you take precautions that we cannot take those precautions in our select board meeting. So, if our meetings were an hour, I'd say, hey, let's give it a shot. But to be in a, 4-hour meeting in an enclosed space with not knowing whether our fellow citizens are vaccinated or not, doesn't sound really smart to me or safe. And again, it's not me, although I'd love Zoom, but it's reflecting my concern for the public safety as a whole. Daniel.
So I just want to clarify, are you concerned about your safety in attending that meeting?
To a certain extent, yes, but my broader concern is for the community as a whole, as a public safety measure.
So I think that the public, as they are doing in every other aspect of their life right now, will make a decision, right? We are not in this position anymore where everything is closed, for good or for ill. And people go about their lives and make choices every single day. And I just want, as I said before, I got to speak up for what I need. And there are only 6 people who have to be at these meetings, right? The 5 of us and Peter. I am comfortable being around you all. Obviously other people may attend. People will choose to do so, if that's the right thing for them. Because we have a hybrid setup, they can do so differently. But I'm saying the people that have to be there, which is us, I want to be in the room with you all. And I'm not willing to just keep kicking the can down the road as we get into the winter. So that is my need, and you can all support me in that or not, and that's fine by me.
Of course.
Can I just say possibly Patrick too, if we're all
Yes,
in the room. I'm kind of curious that you mentioned it already. Daniel, but because I can't actually remember the meeting, and there's always that danger of reading something in the paper and believing it to be true, even though you know it's not to be true. In it, Jess and Liz were quoted as saying they're comfortable with if the cases drop below 50 per 10,000 residents, which it did just a few days ago, just barely 48. I don't know where it's at now because I'm not sure if that's a daily measure or a weekly measure. Daniel probably knows. But is that no longer a bar, or is that just because Kevin plucked it out, it doesn't really feed into the overall argument? Or Jess, come on, give us something.
I think Kevin took needlessly dreadful screenshot of us all, first of all.
That's all you can get, you know?
Yeah, well, I've said, you know, I mean, if there was a rapid test taking tests of people as they entered the building and said, because nobody knows, you know, nobody knows until after they've already got COVID and exposed people to it, whether they have it or not, unless they take like a rapid test right beforehand. So we're not going to do that. So we don't know.
I know all kinds of things you don't know.
Yes, Ian.
Yeah, I haven't really spoken much because I just feel like we've really aired this discussion quite a bit over the months. And I think the reality is there isn't really exactly a right answer. And there's kind of a balance that just needs to be struck by the board. I think the only question I have for Peter is, so I agree with Daniel. Basically, we should, if we decide to go back to being in person, we should lean into the fact that we've decided to have this be a hybrid thing. So people get to make the decision whether they want to take the risk of going in person or be on Zoom. And so my only concern would be if there was anybody in town staff or someone who didn't have a choice, like, is there anyone, like, could Peter tell us that if there was someone who was going to present from town staff or someone like that, that they would be given the choice to be on Zoom and not have to come in person? Because the public gets to just choose. And I want to make sure that if the board's going to pull us back in person, that I'm not going to make somebody come in person that doesn't want to be there because they feel like their job is a part of that. That would be my only question.
Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you. Ian, thanks for asking that question. That is something we've discussed within staff, and it's something I've made a decision about in terms of my responsibility for the staff, but we've not talked about it here. So it's a good question. It's a good thing for me to say out loud. Any staff member who wanted to present to the board via Zoom would be allowed to do that with no repercussions. And in fact, it's my recollection that back in the summer when we were meeting in person, there were times when staff members presented on Zoom, and some, at least, of our reaction to that was, gee, this makes a lot of sense, because often a staff member is only in the meeting for a few minutes, but has to sit around waiting for that opportunity for hours. So.
Yes, I remember that.
Thank you, Peter.
All right. If we've all said what we want to say, if Daniel, you want to bring up that motion, we'll vote on it.
Jessica, do you have anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, sure. I haven't weighed in yet. I think over the last 2 weeks, over the last 2 months, I've been exploring what my personal boundaries are around safety and comfort, and had some really interesting experiences just this last weekend with visiting a place where people are indoors, no masks, no vaccination checks, being at a place where folks were indoors, everyone had to do a vaccination check, and most folks were wearing masks as well. And it set a different bar for what I'm comfortable with. While I do understand the concerns, Liz, that you have about public safety, In some ways, this feels like in line with the way the board went on the mask decision, which was letting the public take responsibility and be responsible for their own safety and making the choices that make them feel most safe. So showing up at a meeting or showing up hybrid on Zoom as their own personal safety system, whatever. Anyway, so that's where I'm at. I'm ready to come back in person.
Okay, Daniel, you want to take that vote?
Sure. I
Oh,
move.
Peter,
Go
wait.
ahead, Peter.
Peter?
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to add one more thing since it seems like you're wrapping up your discussion and heading towards an action. I want to ask the board, if you do vote on a motion here in a moment about resuming in person, could it include this ambiguity, please, that because we're going into weekly meetings now, I'm certain, based on the communication I had previously with VCTV and others, that by 2 weeks from tonight, we could be at the fire station. I'm certain that we can do that. I'm confident that we can do it a week from tonight, but I'm just not sure exactly what VCTV needs to do to be ready to produce a meeting from that site. And so if it's possible, if you did declare as a board your intention to go back in person, if it could be phrased as by or before November 16th, I would appreciate that. And we will let you know just as soon as we can possibly let you know, which is likely tomorrow, whether or not that can be done for the 9th.
Very good. Right, Daniel, you want to clerk that up? in your
Sure,
notes?
I will do it just now. Let's see. So I move to resume in-person select board meetings by or before November 16th. Masks mandatory.
All right.
Great.
All select board members in favor of Daniel's motion, please raise your hand and say aye. All right.
Aye.
Hi.
Thank you. And there's one nay. So thank you. Respected decision of the board, and we'll have our meeting as Peter tells us tomorrow, whether it's next week or in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next order of business is the select board annual goals for 2021, 2022. There has been a excellent summary of the goals and what we've done on them to date. And I ask the board whether people would like to make comments or the particular thing they want to add. I don't think it's necessary to run down each item. So let's just leave it to select board members who have certain comments they want to make on a particular item or certain amendments they would like to make. And does anyone want to start us off, or I certainly can. All
I'm going
right.
to zip it because I took up too much space. So somebody else.
All right, let's see. I am going to.
I'll just, okay.
Oh, go ahead, Tim.
I was just going to say, it's always pretty satisfying when you see. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh.
And I forgot that I think that Peter wanted to introduce this matter.
Fine.
Okay,
No problem.
go ahead, Tim.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Okay. No, I was just going to say it's always satisfying when you see some progress on almost every item, if not completion. Just wanted to throw out a little positivity and just take it away, Liz.
Yeah, it really is a pretty amazing report on our work this past year, because not only did we advance as a select board and as a town staff all these myriad of things, but we also hired a new town manager and did a lot of hard decisions that we should all be very comfortable with. I only wanted to add something that I discussed earlier. I want better bus service. I want bus service to be recognized as a sustainability action, and I want bus service to better serve the commuting public. And I can discuss that at length, probably better when the bus people come to talk to us. But I want to add that to our goals. And it is mentioned on item 4 under sustainability, talking about, actually item 5.
Mhm.
But I think that would be a good place to add that item, but I think it's something that we could all get behind, and a good move for our town to put those actions into place. Does anyone disagree with that? Ian?
I think it's a good idea.
All right. So other than being pleased with all the work that we've done, I have no further comment. Daniel?
Oh, Ian should go ahead of me.
Ian?
Yeah, I'll go ahead, Daniel. I want to first say I really echo that, both Tim and Liz's points. It is really kind of gratifying to look at this and see sort of all the work that's done. And I have to say, when I look at this, I really mostly what I see is just how much staff work has gone into implementing all of these sometimes kind of vague things that the board is expecting of the town. And I just really appreciate all of the work that staff puts into it and the energy in interpreting what the board is trying to do. I think we are all making a good team. As for some specifics, I'm going to kind of just list them off. First one is under community safety. I would be down to just add a number 3, which is, I could phrase it something like define the methodology for implementing the community safety fund, something like that, or allocating maybe is a better word. And then
example a little bit lower down on the page, formalize the fossil-free facilities fund. Just copy formalize.
Right.
Well, I actually looked at that and I thought, God, that's very vague. So, but maybe we won't be that vague. We can be that. But that's the same. Yeah, I take that, Jess. Fair point.
Yeah, although there's nothing wrong with defining the method for fund allocation.
Yeah. Because I feel like, I don't know, I guess I could get into formalize. The fossil free fund was kind of like, we weren't sure quite what it was going to be about. I feel like the community safety, we're keeping it really broad on purpose, and allocating it isn't really defining it. It's more like what's going to be just the methodology.
And formalize begins with an F.
True. The second one is, it's more of a question to Peter for housing number 3. I've gotten a couple of questions about this recently in the community, and I'd like to just know if the town staff / Sue needs more clarity on number 3, because I feel like it's kind of vague.
Thank you. We don't need more clarity. We do need more time. And that's why we speak about addressing this in 2022.
Yeah.
Even though the ordinance was adopted in December last year, because of the lag for the publication of it and the 60 days of waiting under the statutes before it becomes effective, it was actually February before it went into effect, kind of towards the end of February. So we're not even really approaching 1 year yet. We're more than 6 months, but quite a bit shy of a year. And for much of this time, if not all of it, it's been the ability to get a read on what's happening because of the unusual regulations and prohibiting evictions and some of the other dynamics related to the rental market during COVID. All of that makes assessing the impact of the ordinance pretty challenging. I think we have so much else going on right now that the appropriate thing to do is recognize that this needs to be done later. And when you and the town staff get to it sometime in 2022, at that time, you should have a conversation on the front end, I think, about, what are you trying to determine? Because even then you should be cautious about using limited data from an unusual period to draw any conclusions about the ordinance before you see it play out over a longer period.
Thank you. Liz, I have one more.
Oh, please, of course.
Last one, and this is maybe just a little bit of a poke at Peter. For utilities one, could we put some kind of time frame on the stormwater utility? Or is that also going to be a no?
No,
Okay.
because of the discussion that we had, when we were hopeful that by this time we would actually be initiating the work to create it. Instead, as we discussed, I think it was about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, the stormwater feasibility study that we did, talking about how to go forward with it, was really clear about some information that's needed to start well. And then, unexpectedly, we had the opportunity to participate in the state program to have a stormwater master plan created for us, with us, that's going to provide a lot of that data that would otherwise be the first step in our process, where we would go out and spend a fair amount of money on engineering to collect that data and organize it well. So it means a little bit slower path to the creation of a stormwater utility, but the huge benefit of, by the time we're actually sort of taking off with this ourselves, we'll have the foundation of the stormwater master plan to build upon. So you in this set of goals, in this select board year, you have done what you could to launch this effort, and it's not insignificant that we're, you approved the stormwater master plan and the follow-up. I don't recall all the detailed steps we described, but there were some follow-up staff actions that we described that evening as things we would do while the stormwater master plan was being conducted, so that, when that wraps up, the town is ready to move forward aggressively towards creating the utility. And you embrace that path, and I think that's an important progress.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I just had to ask.
Ian, the floor is yours if you have more comments.
Nope, that was my last one.
Okay, very good. Who's next? Daniel.
Thanks. I concur with Ian actually on the point about the community safety, develop criteria for the equitable and accessible, process disbursement of those funds. It's definitely important that people in the community who want to develop creative projects know how to access that. And it's likely that people who are marginalized will have less access to them just because of how things work when, if you've got a bunch of staff and a lot of experience writing grants, you're going to be much more easily able to access them. And I'm not saying that organizations with staff and grant writing experience are bad, just, I want it to be an equitable and accessible fund. And I mean, I think Peter hits the nail on the head with the review and impact of the rental housing ordinance. God, did we pick a year to not understand how that ordinance played out? The world of housing right now is very strange, and it's going to be really hard to say specifically. I think it was always going to be hard to really identify, you know, what that ordinance did and what it didn't do, but we picked a year with some weird data points. But you know, that's not to say that we shouldn't like get feedback about it. I would just caution, you know, reading too much into that. And then the one other thing I wanted to say that was novel was about the town website. And I just kind of wanted to check in on where we are in the process with that. I kind of forgot a little bit. I know that there was an RFP asked for by town meeting. So yeah, just like to hear about that.
May I?
Peter, please.
Two things. Direct answer to that is slow out of the gate. So you've all remarked on the volume of other things going on. You're quite right, I think, both in terms of work at the select board level and work throughout our staff. That particular one is not as far along as we would have hoped at this time, but you will get an update on it as we go through this budget process and talk about things that are changing between this budget and next budget. That, unlike the, you know, we had a conversation earlier about whether the community safety funds would have to be spent by June 30th. And the answer to that is no, because we set up a different fund for it. In fact, the website money and community engagement improvement project, that money does need to be spent by June 30th. And I believe still will be spent and spent well by that time, but it'll need to be a you know, a high priority project going forward in the first 6 months of 2022. We recognize that. We fully appreciate how important that is to the board and the community. It's just not something that we've made as much progress on so far as we would have liked. On the housing, I wanted to make one other point for those who feel uncomfortable that maybe, you know, like Daniel said, you know, we could get some feedback. I think that's certainly true. You know, we're here to receive feedback from those who have opinions to offer us about any of the actions that town government is taking. Specific to housing, there will be discussions here at the select board over the course of the next couple of months regarding the housing study that's been done. That's coming to a completion. There's going to be some review here, some actions to take as a result of it. And that'll provide a really good focused moment to be hearing from the community, the kinds of more subjective feedback that might be helpful to you as you gauge how you think it might be going with the rental housing ordinance.
Thank you. Who else from the select board? Jessica, I see your hand.
So my first question is about number 3 under COVID recovery, restoring the vitality of outdoor public spaces. What an amazing summer we had. Like, it was fantastic. Now that it's a bit colder, I'm curious, like, how does that momentum continue to bring vitality to downtown and our community?
Is that a question seeking an answer or a pondering?
That is, I mean, I'm curious if there is anything like happening or planned or thought about to support.
Sure. Here's what I would say about that. I think it's important for us to give a shout out to the folks in the community who have organized outdoor activities. What we've done within town government is everything that we can do to facilitate those being held and being successful. So we've learned some things about how to be quite a lot more flexible with some of our public spaces. The Harmony Lot comes specifically to mind, about, you know, allowing that to be used both as a parking lot and as a gathering place on the same evening, because we've figured out how to properly section it off. So we will continue to employ that kind of a flexible approach to assisting folks who organize things. And there are some events, even over the years, without the intentional use of outdoor spaces, some events that have just naturally lent themselves to being outdoor activities, even in the winter. I expect those will continue to happen. I expect there will be some additional creative energy put into other things that might happen. But at this time, I don't know of any specific ones to mention. What I would say is one other thing that was true of the town's actions in this regard last year, and we intend for it to be true again this year, is that if the folks who are doing business in the 2 parklets that remain wish to continue through the winter, we did it on a trial basis last year because we weren't sure really that we'd be able to plow around them. We thought it might be, unsafe or at least impractical. And we found it actually was okay. Even the one on Elliott Street worked out okay. And it was really quite easy to work around the one up in the High Grove lot. And so our intention is to work with those businesses in the DBA. And if they wish to have those parklets continue to be used throughout the winter, then we'll accommodate that. In fact, we're looking right now with a couple of different affected businesses. We're looking at the possibility of changing the configuration of the Hermit Thrush one at the High Grove parking lot. Not so much because of the coming of winter, but more just because of some things learned from the experience this summer.
Let's just have a little shout out for the New Jersey barrier. Ian,
The
did I see,
versatile tool.
Technically a Jersey barrier.
did I see your hand raised?
My
Ian?
hand did go for a moment. Because I was just wondering whether for the High Grove lot barrier, double barriers, if we were going to need to reassess it for the winter. Like I'm thinking about having to like plow like the sidewalk if it, yeah.
So the northern one is going away.
Okay,
And we're looking at reconfiguring the southern one to allow a bit more space.
cool.
And we think that'll work fine in terms of plowing.
Thank you.
Maybe no
Anyone else?
plowing will be needed.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I have a couple.
Yeah, please,
More.
Jess, go ahead.
All right. So I'm on board with Ian's number 3 under the community safety thing. I think defining that should be one of our goals, and setting a date in December, like we discussed before, also important for number 2. So number 2 under diversity, equity, inclusion. I'm curious if there's a way that the learning can come up to us so that we have the same language and understanding as the wonderful staff is attaining, or at least have some sort of public way of sharing that with the select board so that we're sort of up on what the staff is talking about and considering.
Sure.
Great idea.
I know it does come in our reports every so often,
Mhm.
but
Yeah, an important part of what we're doing with this work is how we have a group of employees, the IDEA committee, the committee in its formation wanted to add accessible to the DEI of diversity, equity, inclusion. We thought that was a great idea. So it is the IDEA committee here in Brattleboro. And it's a group of employees representing all the different departments and all the different levels of authority within the organization that have been working really diligently, led by Sally, our HR director, who is also, because she's a member of the management team, Sally Nick is providing leadership and facilitation to the IDEA committee and ensuring she is the continuity who, making sure that we within our management team work are moving in parallel with the IDEA committee, reading the same things they're reading, watching the videos and webinars that they're watching, and having good discussions around these issues and building our capacity as a town staff. So yes, the answer is yes. It is certainly possible for us to bring that up to the select board level. I think it is something we should give some thought to how to do that, and on what intervals you want to be doing that, and if you could allow Sally and myself and the other involved staff to give that some thought and bring it back to you. I think that would be great to have more active involvement of the select board in this work.
Great idea, Jessica. What else? All right, Jessica, you have the floor. Do you have anything else?
I guess I was curious, but I think you kind of answered it when you talked about the website and things hadn't moved very far in that yet. I was curious about the amount and quality of community engagement. And I know part of that was related to website, but part of that was also other stuff going on.
Yeah, that's fair. I think so I maybe was a little too in my apologetic feeling, and I do feel apologetic about the overall effort, particularly website focused. I overlooked the fact that you're quite right that there have been processes in the housing study process in the beginning of the work on the website RFP and the community engagement improvement process that we're undertaking. And in several other aspects as well. There have been, particularly out of the planning department, but not just out of the planning department, some really intentional efforts made to improve the amount and quality of our community engagement. I will say, I think that that's likely to take a significant leap further once we've actually, engaged on the topic. And so the project that you challenged us to undertake when this was created, it started as the recognition that our website was outdated and needed to be upgraded. And about a year ago right now, during the budget consideration, you determined that it would be both for the upgrading of the website and improving our community engagement, both the amount and the quality. Thank you, Jessica, for pointing out. Yeah, we've begun to make some improvements, some progress in that regard. But I believe that its component piece of the bigger project will show, more measurable progress in that area.
Great. Anything else, Jess?
No.
All right. Has everyone weighed in? Does anyone else have?
I have
anything?
not weighed in. My voice is changing as we speak, by the way. It's
Oh,
very.
yes. So where are you?
I have not weighed in.
Wow.
Yeah, sorry. But I'm going to go with it. No, I don't really need to weigh in. The one thing I wanted to say was, if you allow me a snarky comment, anyone who is interested in getting a report as to how the rental housing deposit ordinance is going, just has to talk to me. Just buy me a beer and I will tell you how it's going. So thank you.
Yes, Peter.
If the select board is ready to talk about wrapping up this item and the next step, I have a suggestion.
I think we're ready. Thank you, Peter.
Okay. So you've made, if I followed you well in this conversation, you've made 3 specific asks in terms of modifying what was brought to you for this update. And just going in the order in which they appear in the document, that's to get the select board involved in the DEI work, to add a number 3 under community safety that relates, and I'm going to come back to this and talk about it more explicitly in a moment, that relates to the allocation of the funds, and to add a reference under sustainability to improving the bus service in town. The first and the third of those would be pretty easy for us to just sort of phrase on the fly. I would take a stab at, I think you mean to say XYZ, and you might tweak it, or you might say, yeah, that's great. The second one, the defining the methodology for the allocation, I I've heard it described two different ways. I want to share some words with you in a moment that you said earlier in this conversation, all of which I think are important. And based on the importance of the matter and the complexity of getting the wording right, I don't think we ought to try to do this on the fly tonight. My suggestion is that you allow staff to work with this and bring you back a document that won't be giving any further updates on this. This has been your quarterly check-in on how you're doing, but will be the list of goals for this year with the 3 modifications attached to it and underlined, so that you can see how you're, modifying as you go forward with what you want to accomplish in the remainder of the year. And I'd appreciate having a week to do that, or a few days to do that, so we can put it out on Friday, so that we can be more thoughtful about getting the wording right on that item. What I heard initially from Ian was define the methodology for allocation of the funds from the Community Safety Fund. And then I heard Daniel add the words criteria, equitable, and accessible in the course of his comments. And I believe it's important to blend in those 3 words that Daniel offered and somehow meld them with the intentions that Ian offered. And I heard everybody else among you speak supportively of doing this, adding this, so that there is in fact the process by which you make really transparent how you're going to proceed. And so if it's okay with you, I think you could stop for this evening right there, and we can bring you back the recommendations for the amendments to your goals in Friday's backup for next Tuesday's meeting.
The beauty of having meetings every week. Thank you, Peter. Thank you all. All right. Why don't we give Peter a second to catch his breath and then ask him about employee health insurance renewal?
Good to go if you are.
Okay.
Okay. So as is reflected in the memorandum dated October 28th, that's in your backup about this, we had a rough year among the plan participants, which means town employees and our family members. There were several significant claims, individual claims that were much larger than average or normal. There was a larger number of claims overall, and a larger number of sort of medium to large claims. It just, in every way, it was a rough year. A year for being really grateful to have good health insurance. But the math of it is that what they call loss ratio for Blue Cross on our account this year was 141%, meaning that they spent $141 for every $100 that we paid in premiums. We all know how insurance works. When we pay our premiums and we have a good year, sometimes that's reflected in our premiums the next year. Sometimes it's not. A lot depends on what's going on around us in the marketplace. And of course, there are marketplace influences here too. But when you have a very bad year, you almost always get a very challenging renewal. And we have that here. The original proposal was an almost 15% increase in the cost of premiums. We were well represented, as we have been over the years, by the folks at the Richards Group, who negotiated the parameters within which we could work with Blue Cross to bring this down. Some of that resulted in some reduction in the increase just based on how they apply the math of the one bad year within the context of a multi-year period. And then there was also some alternatives presented to us of ways in which we could make substantive but relatively minor in terms of how that will impact the users, changes to the plan. So there's a few different ways in which our plan has been exceedingly flexible, way more flexible than is normal in the health insurance marketplace. One of which has been that our plan has continued to provide coverage, not as much coverage, but still coverage for people using out-of-network providers, doctors and other services. If you're not within the Blue Cross network, you still get some Blue Cross benefit and payment if you choose to go outside the network. Most insurance plans are operating these days on what's called an exclusive provider organization basis, an EPO, where there is a list of doctors and other providers you can go to. And if you go to one that's not on that list, you pay 100% of the cost. The Blue Cross, because it's Blue Cross that provides our insurance, their network is very broad, not just here in Vermont, but across the country. They have a very broad network of providers. So it's really pretty easy to stay within the Blue Cross network. Because it is, people have mostly chosen to do that anyway, because you get better coverage. Blue Cross pays more of the bills if you stay in network. But yet the town and the employees in the cost share have been paying a higher premium in order to have the flexibility of being able to go outside the network and still get some costs recovered. So one of the recommendations was do away with that and be more normal and have an EPO. In a very similar kind of dynamic, they have a recommendation, and I need to check the language on this to get it right. I believe it's a national preferred formulary. National preferred formulary. So a formulary is a list of drugs that are covered under the plan. So for prescription drugs, again, there has been a formulary used for our plan that is a broader formulary that allows more choice to the participants in the plan than is typical. What most plans use is what's called the national preferred formulary, and that's where there might be a dozen different drugs that are effective in treating a certain kind of condition. Instead of being able to choose from among the dozen, maybe there are 4 or 6 or 8 that are on the preferred formulary, and you have to pick from one of those, or else you pay all of it. You don't get the benefit. So that the NPF was also recommended as a way in which we could reduce the cost increase this year and just have a more responsible, more affordable plan in the bigger picture going forward. A concern that is always in play when you're making changes like this that narrow down the choices is how much impact will there be to the users? And in fact, on the prescription drug piece, the impact was no greater than it was for the exclusive provider piece of this. In both cases, and we were just frankly kind of lucky about this on the drug side, because there was an incentive for people all along to choose staying in the network on the provider side. There hasn't been such an incentive on the drug side, but we were just fortunate that the drugs that people have been prescribed and are using mostly, almost entirely fall within the NPF. And so what they call disruption in the insurance industry, disruption is the degree to which individuals have become used to going to a particular doctor or taking a particular drug, and will have to change that in order to stay within the plan going forward. That's called disruption. The degree of disruption was really tiny. I don't have those numbers right at hand, but I can tell you from memory, there were, I could count on one hand the number of employees negatively affected by each of these changes. They're almost certainly different employees in one case from the other case. But really very few, and actually those are participants, not even employees. So we have 140 plus employees. We have well over 300 people who are in the plan. I believe it's over 400 actually that are in the plan. And literally just a few people inconvenienced by the changes that are proposed to be made. Based on that, based on the degree to which this would bring down the pricing, and the very limited degree to which it would even be inconvenient for anyone, the group of employees with whom we work around these health insurance issues readily agreed with our town management team perspective that we should indeed implement the EPO and the NPF and achieve the savings that are available through that. And I should speak for just a second about that committee. So So there is actually a formal process we follow. We initiated it a few years ago when we were facing a particularly, actually it's about 6 or 7 years ago now, when we had a daunting renewal year like this, and we actually made some really substantive changes in the plan. That was when we implemented the health reimbursement arrangement portion, where we have that self-insured layer where the town pays the bills. So we have what the employees are responsible for, and then the HRA layer, and then we hit the deductible, and Blue Cross pays the bills above that. In the implementation of the HRA layer, we worked with a group of employees so that we had representatives from each of the 4 unions, as well as a representative from the non-union group, working together with us on exploring the options for how to improve the affordability of the plan. And after that successful experience together, we committed that as we went through the annual renewal process, we would look at the renewal that was proposed to us with this employee committee each time, so that if we were to make changes as we're recommending to you tonight, that would be done collaboratively with the employees, with the unions and with the non-union group. And that's been a really successful process for us. We've done a couple of tiny tweaks over the years. Mostly we have left the plan as is since making the big change to the HRA. This year it is a more substantive set of changes, and it was really helpful that we've had this positive experience of collaboration that we've developed, so that getting together and looking at these issues felt comfortable for people. And it was pretty easy for us to achieve the consensus to bring you what we brought you tonight. So the third change that will reduce cost, this one's a little more nuanced. The first two I think are pretty clear. You have less choice, therefore less cost in premium, because Blue Cross doesn't have as much risk. But the third piece is increasing the deductible. When we increase the deductible under the current format of the plan, it means the town is increasing the HRA layer, so that our contractual obligation to the employees to keep the employees' exposure the same continues. So what we're doing here is proposing to you the increase of the deductible from $4,000 for an individual and $8,000 for a couple or a family to $5,000 for an individual and $10,000 for a couple or a family. The portion of that the employee is responsible for is the first $3,000. Let me get this right. The first $1,500 for an individual and the first $3,000 for a family. And then the balance of that is the HRA layer. So in the HRA layer, the town is paying the bills, but the reason why that works, some years and not all, but it worked for us this year, is we reduce our reliance on Blue Cross, bringing down the premium. And then we have to, and this is where the Richards Group does essentially important work for us. We have to then assess how much additional risk the town is taking, the likelihood that the additional cost we will bear will be near or above the amount of the savings for Blue Cross, or for us in our payments to Blue Cross. That analysis works. The analysis indicates that this change will work for us this year because the likelihood of people actually what they call penetrating the layer, getting above the 4,000, 8,000 limits that already exist in the plan, and being in that area between 4,000 and 5,000 for an individual, or between 8,000 and 10,000 for a household, the probability of any individual participant getting up into that layer is small enough that we can draw down the expected number of dollars from that exposure the town is actually going to have to pay. We always do this on a very conservative basis. We always leave some cushion there between what the actuaries tell you is the number and what a, like overly cautious number would be. And so we've been generally about 5% more cautious than the actuaries say we can be, just to make sure, because the impact of having a year where we have to pay more HRA money out in claims than what we had budgeted is so negative for the rest of operations of town government that we want to make sure that we're being prudent there and not overly aggressive with that number. But even using it, so we've been using for the current plan a factor of 45%, that we would only expend 45% of the money that is our total exposure under the HRA layer. And based on the advice we've received from Richards, we can drop that to 43% by adding this additional space in the HRA layer, because those are the final dollars to get spent, right? People already have to be having a pretty major claim before they're going to get up into that space and then move on into passing the deductible and being covered by Blue Cross. So the bottom line of these three changes is on the chart that's before you for your action this evening, the far right shaded column, option 3, where the deductible, the higher deductible, the national preferred formulary, and the exclusive provider organization all would be implemented. And it brings down the amount of the Blue Cross premium increase from 14.6% to 6.7%. Then if you look down in the HRA funding portion, you can see that our budget number needs to increase from 236,250 to 316,050 because we are taking on some additional risk. So it's 43% of a bigger number than what we have had at 45% of a smaller number. Okay, so we do have additional exposure there to the tune of about $80,000, but the savings on the premium is in excess of $100,000, 120 or so. And so the net brings down the overall cost increase for the plan from a 12.3% increase on the initial offer of renewal to our recommendations before you this evening, which is an 8.8% increase. Still on the high side of what we'd like to see, but well within that 5 to 10% that is pretty normal when you're having a year with substantial claims and you're having to face the challenge of a higher than normal increase. The employees are in we together with the employees are in the third year, are about to enter the third year of implementing the cost sharing on the premiums. So it was 1% paid by the employees the first year, 3% this year, and beginning January 1st, 5% of the premium will be paid by the employees. So the employees' share of this increased cost, the total amount paid by the employees is going to increase by about $55,000. The overall cost increase is $219,000, and the balance between those is what would be borne by the town. Happy to answer questions if I can. We recommend that you approve the renewal of the plan using the option 3.
Thank you, Peter. Daniel.
Thanks, Peter. And I am glad that there is a group of people that meets and that involves different, organizations within the town, union and non-union. When I first read this, I was like, how do these staff feel about this? And then as I digested the chart, which took some digesting, I came to understand, and I guess I do want to just clarify that the employee end of things, the actual out-of-pocket expenses potentially payable by an employee have not changed.
That's correct.
Right? And so I feel two responsibilities. There's a responsibility to approve a plan that is supported by town staff. And also there is a responsibility to the taxpayer to keep costs down to a reasonable extent. And so I feel like the path that you have trod in this achieves both those things. It all sucks. I hate how much money we have to spend on this. I hate how inequitable a system it is. I'm glad that town staff are well covered. I still remember paying my thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars out of pocket from earlier this year. I hate it so much, but thank you for the work. And I would support option 3.
Ian,
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter, for that really in-depth explanation. I just have 2 questions, and I want to get into just for a minute because we're talking about changing health insurance while we are still in a pandemic. So just it's something. And it's deeply personal. And one of the things that we're talking about is reducing choice, and that is even with your explanation, it is something that kind of like makes me a little uncomfortable. So the first question I had was, for the disruption analysis that was done by Blue Cross Blue Shield and Richard's group for the EPO and the NPF, while the number was low, very low,
Yes.
Was there any service or medication that, and maybe you can't answer this for me, Peter, and I apologize if I'm putting you on the spot. Is there any medication or service that was being acquired in the old setup where there was a reduction, but not as much of a reduction for using someone outside of the plan? Is there any service where to acquire that service, there would be a much greater distance to be able to actually access it?
So I can't speak explicitly to travel distance, although I think my answer will also provide some reassurance on that. What I can tell you unequivocally is on the drug part of this, every one of the situations of disruption, each one of the instances of disruption involved a medication that is easily replaced by something that is on the formulary. The disruption for the use of the providers' services, we didn't look at geography, but we were provided, and I want to be really clear that in no case did it involve anybody's names. This is all HIPAA protected. We don't have any idea who's going to be disrupted. What we know is that in the universe of affected people, very few people are going to be disrupted. And almost not at all on the drug side. On the provider side, what was interesting is it tended to be like ancillary things, not general practitioners, and not a doctor who's a specialist. But I'm gonna use a example that might or might not be explicitly accurate to this analysis that was done with our group of employees, because I want to be really clear. I'm not crystal clear on the memory, and I don't have the data in front of me. But it was it was the kind of service like physical therapy or maybe like chiropractic or something like that. It was sort of supplementary rehab or wellness kind of stuff, as opposed to basic medical care. Mm-hmm. And that mattered to the folks who were advising us, because they were saying those are the kinds of things that usually there is less choice for, and less choice within the plan, and alternative providers who are in fact on the network. So it felt also, based on the very few people who would be affected and the type of impact, the type of service for which they would be affected, it again was pretty readily agreed by both the employees and our management team that this was the right thing to do.
Thank you very much. Can I follow one other question, Liz? So, and then the other question I had was, so the very really fascinating analysis for the HRA exposure versus the premium reduction, and what Richard's Group does for us to sort of determine whether that's going to pay off basically for us in the next year. So do we, and I guess I'm just going to put a question to you, Peter, maybe you can just answer yes. Do we feel like the level of surety that the Richards Group gave in the analysis for the HRA exposure versus the premium reduction is worth the 1.3% reduction in the overall renewal increase that implementing option 3 versus option 1 would create?
Yes. You know how hard that is for me. And, and I know you're an attorney, so, you know,
Not yet.
you would have the judge admonish me to just answer the question, but if you'll indulge me for 2 sentences of explanation.
Sure.
The reason why I can say unequivocally yes is because Richards has been equally clear in discouraging us from using this tool in the past. There have been renewal years where we looked at this option. I said, you know, you're just not going to gain enough benefit on the premium reduction to make it worth the extra risk.
Yeah.
This year, they feel that it is.
Okay. No, and that's exactly what I needed to hear, because I just feel like if it was a little bit more vague, and we're only like, it's only 1.3%, like, and it's, you know, maybe this will, maybe it won't, then I would be seriously considering not option 3. But with that additional information, yeah, I really appreciate that. Yeah, I'm all for option 3.
Thank you, Ian. Tim?
First of all, I want to chastise my fellow board member for using the word fascinating when it came to that last subject. That's just not acceptable to the English language, in my opinion. But I just wanted to say that I really appreciate management and employees coming together and doing this work that not only saved them money, but is saving the taxpayer money. Sometimes, indeed, they're both employees and taxpayers, so that works out for everybody. But I think that should go noticed, because it really is. It's a good effort. I was on this board when we moved us forward towards the first 1% share, and then 3% share, and then 5% share. And we did use the tried and boring term of skin in the game, but I think it really is a real thing. And it makes the team that's working on this kind of thing feel more like a team. I did the quick math on the premiums, by the way. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, we get up to 5% employee share starting in the next, well, the actual January to December year, right?
Yeah, the calendar year 2022, it'll be 5%, correct?
Yeah. So that in, for a single person is $40 per month. For a dual, it's $72. And for a family, that's $106. And I just want to say that out loud because 2 reasons. I recently had to get thrown, my son and I are getting thrown into the woods of having to get our own insurance and navigating that whole thing. And these are great prices for that. And given the fact that we're in this messed up world, getting out of after what Daniel was saying, where we have to pay so much for health insurance, which is not a good thing. But in the reality we live in, those numbers are fantastic. And I really feel like we should be moving towards, in a few more years, and I'm sure the employees would understand us needing to do this, to move to a 10% match within the next few years too. That's just not germane to this decision, of course, but I think it's good to kind of send those signals out and say that in the grand scheme of things, we have to kind of come a little bit closer, especially given all of the very good employee pay initiatives we've been having to kind of balance things out for the taxpayers. Yeah, not sexy talk, but just.
Thank you, Tim. Yes, Daniel?
Just a quick question about that. I'm presuming that would be collective bargaining.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. I didn't miss that. All right.
Jessica, do you have comments? Okay. So my original concern was about the out-of-network, but having our own family medical issues this summer, I realized that the Blue Cross Blue Shield network is quite extensive. But my real comment is that this is another example of the Elwell Town Administration, that it's a negotiation of goodwill by both parties to find an equitable solution, and I'm in favor of option 3. Anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Tim?
I'll make a motion to approve the renewal of the town's employee health insurance program for calendar year 2022 as presented.
Thank you, Tim. Tim has moved to approve the renewal of the town's employee health insurance program for calendar year 2022 as presented. All select board members in favor of this motion, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
There we go. Aye, carries 5-0. Thank you. So here we are, 4 minutes to 8. Let's take a break and then hear all about the FY23 proposed budget. Let's come back at 10 after 8. Thank you. All right. Now that we're back in session, let me introduce Peter to discuss the budget.
Thank you, Liz. So I'll offer my annual apology at this point. Tonight's the overview. The budget document went out earlier today. The select board members each received a notebook. We posted it on the town's website. We collectively, as a town staff and a town team, look very much forward to the detailed week by week process we will now go through together to help you make decisions in the first instance, and then you will send on a recommended budget to representative town meeting to make the final decisions about this budget next spring. It is a process that I think is more enjoyable for folks when we're doing the very detailed pieces on a particular week as we go along, than probably what the next half hour or so is going to feel like. But it is important for us to approach that work and get into those details, seeing a big picture. You know, where do the capital improvements fit into the overall? Where do the reducing and increasing revenue streams fit into how we're funding town government? And so for the next half hour or so, as succinctly as I can, but probably, you know, creating a little bit of a head bob here or there, I'm going to go through the whole thing and give a quick statement about many different pieces of the town's budget, hoping that that sets the table appropriately for when we move on into detailed discussions next week. The total proposed FY23 general fund budget is $19,978,343. That's an increase of just shy of $300,000 or 1.5% over the adopted FY22 general fund budget, increase of about $294,000 from one year to the next. So in the overall increase, I would suggest 1.5% is pretty lean. It is the sum total, though, it is the aggregate impact of things that are up and things that are down, some of them substantially. One of the things where I'm going to take a deeper dive than usual tonight is into the relationship between fund balance and property taxes. And you'll see in a few moments how different the impact of property taxes can be from the overall impact of a relatively more modest increase in the total budget. Notable cost decreases from FY22 to FY23 include the transfer to the capital fund, debt service payments, and workers' compensation costs. And I'll have more to say about each one of those when we get to them and going through the each different category of expenditure. Notable cost increases in this proposed budget include the first budgeted transfer to the fossil fuel free facilities fund, the creation of 2 new employee positions, a strategic plan in the fire department, and the creation of an online permitting system that will be operated by several different departments as part of our upgrades in both website and community engagement. That's one where, out ahead of the overall project, we have a particular tool that we would like to move ahead with that we believe is going to be a big benefit both to staff and to the community. And finally, as we talked about earlier this evening, there will be additional in the proposed budget. There is an additional $100,000 allocation to the community safety fund that you voted in the last meeting to create. That, I want to be clear for the record, I talked about things that are decreases, things that are increases. This one is actually a shift as opposed to an increase or decrease. It certainly is an increase from 0 to a budgeted allocation to this fund. Unlike the other matters that I've mentioned that kind of stand on their own merits, this particular one represents a reallocation of funds that are expected to be saved by continued vacant police officer positions in the police department. So we took the value of 2 entry-level police officer salaries and propose allocating that to the community safety fund. To fund this budget, there's a wide variety of revenues. We're going to talk about revenues in great detail next week, across all the different line items. We're going to talk about categories of revenue in a little bit more detail this evening. But the one, of course, that matters most of all to broadly throughout our community is the property tax rate. And I'm sorry to say, but I have a lot more to say about it in a few minutes, that initially this budget is proposing a 3.5% increase, which is a 4.74 cents increase in the property tax rate. That is quite a lot higher than normal, particularly for this stage in the process. There have been years in the relatively recent past when the town had an increase of this magnitude or greater, typically due to, in the last 5 to 7 years, typically due to decisions that were made at representative town meeting. So there was a year when a separate question at town meeting was whether or not to spend $140,000 to buy a second sidewalk plow. And town meeting said yes and increased property taxes that year by that amount to be able to make that purchase. There have been multiple years in recent history where there were operational initiatives or programmatic initiatives that were things that came up at town meeting, particularly but not exclusively related to human services funding, where budgets were increased. But when select boards have made your final decisions, you and your predecessors have made your final decisions on the budgets that you send to town meeting, it has been typical for years now that you are in the 2.5 to 3.5 cent increase space. And we start the discussion this evening at 4.74 cents. So I recognize that that's problematic. It's also the result of a nuance that calls for a special ask for forgiveness, because in about 5 minutes, I'm going to take maybe less than that actually, in a few minutes, I'm going to take a deeper dive than I wish I were taking into accounting rules and how they affect our use of fund balance, which in turn significantly impacts the proposed property tax rate. It's accounting and municipal finance 101 in a way that is going to be annoying to some people. I appreciate that from the get-go. I think it's really important to take a few minutes to explain it very thoroughly because of how important it is to the bottom line and because of the fact that it is unusual. It is a technical nuance to accounting requirements that we just don't normally deal with. And so I want to go slowly and thoroughly through that. The reason why that matters, in addition to sort of this year's amount of increase to a particular household, is overall we've been striving to take pressure off of the property taxes to find other sources of revenue, and we found modest ways to do that in a number of different areas, some of which we'll be talking about tonight as, additional steps forward in non-tax revenues. The most significant one, and one that has made a very material difference, is the creation a few years back of the local option sales tax, which we're collecting in excess of $900,000 on. We're proposing a budgeted figure of $950,000 for this budget, which is a substantial increase over the prior budget. That's helpful. And it has reduced our reliance on the property tax from we were 86.5% of all the revenues collected by the town in the budget immediately prior to the creation of the local option sales tax came from property taxes. 86.5% were from property taxes. In the proposed budget with this, what I'm going to call inflated property tax increase figure for the reason I'm going to explain in a second, we would be at 81.4% compared to the 86.5% several years ago. And if you make a change that I'm going to recommend to you related to our use of fund balance that will draw the amount of property tax increase down to a more palatable level, then we would actually be at 80.4% reliant on the property taxes. And the 19.6% of revenue generated by sources other than property taxes would be the highest such figure in Brattleboro in over a decade. We're not sure how far back you might have to go to find a time when we were that, collecting that much revenue, that great a percentage of revenue from sources other than the property tax. So the effort in this regard has been working. And for the reasons I'm now going to explain, we'd like to try to help you not take a step backwards on that with the budget that I'm proposing to you tonight. So there is a section in the budget message. I'm working from the 9-page written explanation of the major summary of each different category of expenditure and revenue, and highlighting the major elements of this year's proposed budget. Each year we put out a budget message. It's mine to you at this time of year. We revise it in January so that it's yours to the representative town meeting when the budget goes forward to town meeting in the town report. And this year, at least in this phase of this, there's almost an entire page devoted to something I'm calling the impact of prepaid expenses on the amount of available fund balance. And so begins our journey into the world of accounting rules and impacts. So I want to be really clear that we wouldn't be having this conversation, and I wouldn't be making the recommendation I'm going to be making to you on this topic if we actually had less fund balance at this moment than what we anticipated having when we were looking ahead earlier this year. We're sitting right about exactly the place we expected to be sitting in terms of the amount of general fund balance. However, there's about $500,000 of it that is, for reasons I'm going to explain here in a second, what's called assigned fund balance. It has been declared unavailable to us for use in town operations at this time because it has been assigned. We work, when we're talking about how much fund balance we have available to use in any given year, we work with the unassigned fund balance, that fund balance that is not labeled as obligated to any other particular purpose. And within that, the town's guideline says we need to set aside 10% of the unassigned fund balance. I'm sorry, not right. We need to set aside an amount that is the equivalent of 10% of the annual budget from the unassigned fund balance as our rainy day fund, so that when something like Irene happens, the town has funds readily available to draw on. And Irene is exhibit A for why that's an important thing to do. When it happened and other communities were slow to recover because they had to go out and borrow money to make it happen, Brattleboro had funds available to draw on to put resources where they needed to be immediately all over town. and begin the recovery process quicker. And things went better over the long haul because we were able to do that. So this is an important part of how we do our budgeting, that we set aside that 10% of the unassigned fund balance. And I would not recommend that just as a matter of convenience, you ever go below 10%. I am going to recommend to you tonight that this year, because of the prepaid expenses accounting rule and the explanation I'm going to offer about how we ended up a little out of kilter from what we expected, that I think it is prudent and proper this year for you to set aside 9% and use more fund balance than what I have shown in the proposed budget. And we'll get there here in the next few minutes. So the way that prepaid expenses work, a prepaid expense is something that is paid in one fiscal year, but applied to the next fiscal year. So when we make a payment in June on a bill that's due in July, the accountants apply that payment to the next year's budget. But the cash goes out the door in June. It's appropriate that that be under the accounting rules called designated to be part of the assigned fund balance, right? Because on the books of the fiscal year that's ending in June, it looks like money still in hand, when in fact it's money already out the door. But the very next monthly financial report is going to show you that that money is actually out the door. And so the accounting rule related to prepaid expenses is that you show the fund balance that's an actual reflection of the ending fiscal year's impact on town finances, but you assign portions of that fund balance for various reasons. Some of it can be for obligations other than prepaid expenses. But what's pertinent to tonight's conversation is the prepaid expenses. And it's proper and appropriate that prepaid expenses be identified as assigned fund balance so that they don't seem like they're available in July because that money's actually going to go out the door in July. But here's the nuance. When we do more than our normal amount of prepaid expenses, we end up with what looks like very little unassigned fund balance, or a lesser amount than usual, which is true for accounting purposes. Strictly speaking, the assigned fund balance is greater and the unassigned fund balance is smaller, and so there's less money from an accounting perspective that is available to be used. But I'm now going to offer an explanation that I'm trying to simplify for lay folks like myself, and I think all of you, in terms of accounting expertise. Let's follow a dollar from June of one year to June of the next year, actually to July of the next year. Let's follow a dollar over a 13-month period as a prepaid expense to see what happens, okay? So a dollar that is expended from the FY22 budget, from the FY21 budget that ended this past June 30th, a dollar that was expended as a prepaid expense showed up in our accounting documentation of our year-end position as assigned fund balance on June 30th of 2021. And we go on into the new fiscal year, and throughout the new fiscal year, it remains a part of the assigned fund balance. The expense that it paid in July of 2021 also had a revenue assigned to it, right? Not one for one. We don't have, except in very rare instances, we don't have a particular revenue paying for a particular expense, but we have $19 million, almost $20 million worth of revenue to pay for our $20 million worth of expenses. We don't ever propose a budget that is in deficit. We always propose a balanced budget. So there is always enough revenue in the new fiscal year to pay all of the expenses that are proposed for the new fiscal year. And as you well know, typically, and in fact, almost every year, we end the year having either a little more revenue than expected or having spent a little less than expected or both, and we have a surplus, and that surplus falls into the fund balance and becomes part of this assigned and unassigned fund balance conversation. Okay, but that dollar that is going to go be a prepaid expense in June of 2021 and part of the assigned fund balance for all of fiscal year 22 from July 1st, 21 to June 30, 22, okay, is set aside as though it is not available for us to use, but we also have a dollar of revenue that is, what was intended to be used for that dollar of expense, of prepaid expense. There's a dollar of revenue in the FY22 budget sufficient to pay that bill. So we have $2. We have the dollar that was assigned fund balance, and we have the dollar of revenue, both applicable to FY21. I'm sorry, both applicable to FY22, which is these last 6 months of 21 and the first 6 months of 22. We have these $2 of one a revenue, one a fund balance that are both offsetting the $1 of expense. That comes all the way back around to getting reconciled in the following of the accounting rules when on June 30th, 2022, the unassigned dollar, the assigned dollar becomes unassigned fund balance. So on July 1st, 2022, as we enter into fiscal year 23, the excess prepaid expenses that we had this past year, we paid more than usual in June that was due in July by approximately, and the budget message speaks to this in great detail. I'm not going to go to read you six figures explicitly. I don't think that's useful for tonight's conversation, but it's approximately $500,000. It's between $450,000 and $500,000 greater of what was expended versus what is more normal and what we did last year, right? So we did about $450,000 last year, and we did over $900,000 this year. The difference being on the order of 450 to 500, and that all is that let's call it $500,000 rounded. That $500,000 is assigned fund balance at this moment when we're looking at what is assigned and what is unassigned, and looking just at the unassigned when we think about how much fund balance is available to be used for one-time expenses in the upcoming fiscal year. If that $500,000 had been unassigned fund balance, we'd have been having a really much simpler, infinitely simpler conversation tonight, and a much happier moment in terms of looking at the starting place for these budget discussions in terms of the anticipated impact on property taxes this coming year. But we're not there because we have prepaid those expenses and it's been properly accounted for, and it is assigned fund balance at this moment. It's also true that those dollars, unless we had something catastrophic that happened, and it's an important unless, it's an important asterisk to put on this, that if something like Irene happened or some other, extremely large unanticipated event occurred that the town had to spend money on in the remaining 6 months of this fiscal year, 8 months of this fiscal year, then it is possible that would eat into this sort of rollover fund balance, right? But all things being equal, our expectation can be that these excess assigned fund balance dollars are going to become unassigned fund balance at the end of the fiscal year. So as of next July 1st, when this budget that we're beginning our discussions on actually has its first day, 365 days of being implemented, on day one, the unassigned fund balance is going to grow by about $500,000. And so I think it is prudent that you this year and this year only, because of this unusual circumstance, allocate 9% or set aside 9% of the unassigned balance instead of 10. That'll free up about $200,000. And if you apply that $200,000 to the revenues and expenses of this budget, the property tax increase drops to 3 cents or about 2.2%, much more in line with the overall increase in the budget being only about 1.5%, and being squarely in the midpoint of what has been typical in that 2.5 to 3.5 cent range of what has been typical for select boards to send on to town meeting. I'm sorry it requires so much explanation, and is inevitably going to be confusing to some people and annoying to many. But in fact, all these things are real. It's real that we made the prepaid expenses. It's real that we did the proper accounting for them. It's real that they are classified as assigned fund balance right now. But the unassigned fund balance has plenty of money in it. And those funds, those assigned funds, are going to become unassigned fund balance next year. What constrains us to using only $50,000 instead of $250,000 of unassigned fund balance in this proposed FY20 budget is our self-imposed rule that we set aside 10% instead of not in what I'm recommending for this one time only for these reasons of 9%. We can take a deeper dive into this next week when we're talking about revenues, and we can continue to discuss it as we go on in the weeks ahead. It's going to continue to be something that's an important part of both the decisions you're going to make and our explanations to the public about what's going on within this budget.
Peter?
Yes.
I just wanted to reflect on what we've just absorbed. And you said something about that the 10% or amount equivalent. And I see the nature of this prepayment discussion to allow 9% to be equivalent to 10% in a normal year. Am I correct in thinking of it that way?
Yeah, in fact, equivalent to a bit more than that. I think it's important that we talk about it to the maximum degree that we can, using the terms that actually do apply to the different pots of money, so that we be careful about recasting it as something else. So for instance, it was important to me in the first instance to propose a budget that assumes you're going to stick with 10% and assumes we only have $50,000 worth of fund balance to work with. I've got into this long explanation, and we will continue to talk about this thing because I think it is responsible for you to use another couple $100,000 from it. Frankly, and if it had been done differently, and if it had shown up as unassigned fund balance, you might have chosen to use more than this. You might still choose to use more than this. But what I'm suggesting to you is it is prudent and actually limited in terms of the action you might take to deal with this nuance, to set aside 9 and free up that 200,000 now, knowing that the balance, or at least most of it, is going to free up as unassigned fund balance next July 1st. To the point where, and I should say also, I've been through every bit of this very thoroughly with the town's acting finance director, Lori Garland, because frankly, we're out beyond my expertise in accounting. And I needed to be sure that the way I thought I understood this is in fact 100% accurate, not just like, yeah, you mostly have it. I'm satisfied both from how I have discussed it thoroughly with Lori and then how I showed her the written word that I have distributed to you today. And she said, yep, that's right. I'm 100% confident that we are where we think we are and we can do this and it's responsible. It's also, I think, in the same, as we move forward with it, it's equally important that we talk about it as what it is, rather than sort of how it reflects something that we're more used to. That makes sense?
Daniel?
Yes. I appreciate the attempt at explaining it clearly, and I can almost follow it. And I know how hard it is to even get it to be this simple. I'm glad I'm not a journalist, because this is this is kind of important. It's a huge impact on the budget.
Yeah.
And explaining it clearly is complicated. And so I wonder if, in addition to this written material, if there is any sort of visuals, there's a little piece of it that sounds like a bit of a shell game. It's like $1 here,
It's not a shell game.
I know it's not a shell game. Yes, sorry. Town official and shell game shocker. Whatever we can do to make this easier to digest, because this is something that every town meeting rep is going to want to understand. The town meeting finance committee is going to understand it. I want to understand it. I feel like I do get the gist of it, but unless I'm reading from this description, I feel like I could very easily veer off into, fuzzy territory, which I guess is where I often spend my time anyway.
So we can definitely provide a table. I don't promise that the table is going to be, all that much clearer than the written word in this particular instance because of just, sort of the unusual set of circumstances. It requires accepting the nuance that going down to 9% for 1 year isn't an irresponsible thing to do. We're not just doing it as a matter of convenience. And so that's a thing that's not about accounting, even though it's related to the accounting, but we can show the accounting in numbers and rather than just trying to explain it in words. We'll be happy to do that. I don't know if I'll have it here for next week's meeting, but we'll have it soon.
That's fine. I guess I'm just wondering if we can sort of pull Laurie back in and ask her if there's other ways to show this, I guess accountants show things in charts,
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just thinking of like visual things with arrows and whatnot, but
Sure.
There's a lot of lay people out here who are going to want to try and understand this, and they're going to struggle with it.
And we're going to want them to understand it.
Yeah.
The point is to make sure that people clearly understand that it is not a shell game. It is not getting too cute with the numbers. It is actually just recognizing what is the relationship between unassigned and assigned fund balance and how it has been skewed in this particular year by us prepaying more expenses than usual.
Great. Thank you.
Ian.
I want to let you get back to it, Peter, because we're doing the general thing tonight, and I am very aware of that. So I just want two things. One, I've been kind of picturing it, Daniel, for like image wise as like the following a raindrop through the water cycle.
Mm-hmm, yes.
That's kind of how I've been visualizing it for the dollar going through the. And my question to Peter is do you think in the future weeks, especially when we are talking about specifically the unassigned fund balance to 9% versus 10%, could we have a historical record of past 10% were?
Sure, although that it would be easy for you to thumbnail for yourself because it's 10% of each annual budget.
Oh, so it's
gone up incrementally. Back when we had a $17 million budget, it was $1.7 million. Now that we have a $20 million budget, it's $2 million.
Yeah. Okay. So going down to 9%, I'm wondering like how far back you'd have to go to when we actually were preserving 10% for it to actually reflect what the 9% preservation would be.
The 9% reservation will be a little less than $1.8 million. So it'll be a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago or so, we were at $18 million.
Okay. So then I guess I don't need that any more information. I'm just curious.
I think that's interesting.
Is that your question now?
That's one way of processing this. I would reinforce the point though that if I were asking you, then it would be wrong. I wouldn't ask you to consider doing 9% just as a matter of convenience. So relating that 9% unassigned fund balance set aside to when it was equivalent to 10%, I think assumes that that's our relative level of security. And the point I'm trying to make, and I'm going to need to keep trying to make it, and we're all going to need to keep trying to make it together with each other and to each other and to the communities so that people can understand these monies exist. The fund balance is as robust as we expected it to be at this moment. It's the fact that there's almost $500,000 more assigned and less unassigned that creates the conversation we're having. That's all. The dollars are in hand.
Jessica,
Can I ask just how exactly did that happen this year, that we've prepaid or assigned twice as much money as we usually do?
So I know we have to answer that question. So I'm gonna say it now, and I'm gonna say it really explicitly, clearly, that the payments that were made properly by employees whom we do not count upon to manage our fund balance decision-making, right? There were bills in hand in June that got properly paid that were due in July and got properly shown as prepaid expenses. And because Patrick and I aren't accountants, we weren't aware of it until we saw the accountant's reconciliation of the year-end books. So then we said, oh, wow, look, so much more prepaid that's assigned. And oh my gosh, we don't have enough unassigned fund balance to, do what we thought we were going to be doing at this point. We talked to you in our discussions within the last, when we talked about the long-term plan 6 weeks ago, an expectation that there would actually be a pretty ample amount of fund balance at this moment. And there is. But as we were preparing the budget, we realized that more of it is assigned and less of it is unassigned than what we expected. We went and said, we think there's an error here. And then we learned, no, it's all been properly done and properly accounted for. It's just for the reasons we've been talking about, it results in more assigned and less unassigned. So what the absence of a finance director has consequences. And if the town, and we are once again hopeful, we have a candidate that we'll be doing a second interview with this week. Hopeful that that may be the person who comes and joins the team. And again, we would have a finance director full-time, and all the value that comes with that. In the absence of that, we have a team of people that have been doing amazing work with, lots of support, but limited supervision in terms of the expertise that a finance director brings, right? So we get Lori's advice, Lori Garland, our acting finance director, make sure by supervising and the overall operations that we're doing things right, but isn't here every day to confer about things like, should we pay these bills now or should we pay them the first week of July? And so employees made really good defensible positions that I don't want anybody to feel was the wrong thing to do. I don't want any of them to feel like there's anything for them to be sorry about. In the absence of a finance director saying, hold those, pay them in July against the New Year's revenues, because otherwise they're going to be prepaid expenses and we're going to have this situation. In the absence of somebody who would see that coming and call it out to them, they paid the bills. And that's great. That's what we do. We pay our bills and we pay them timely. The way that happened this year with June turning into July, we ended up with substantially more prepaid expenses than usual. We will be, I say we, the big we, our team will be keen to pay attention to this next June so that this situation doesn't recur into fiscal year 23.
Jessica, go ahead.
I just got one more question. So since this is my first year and I'm brand new to all of this, I am curious what the select board as a body, what our relationship is to that unassigned fund balance when it becomes available, or however you want to put it, on July 1st.
So that's why we're talking about it now, because your relationship to it is only what you propose and representative town meeting authorizes in terms of using the fund balance. The statutes require that any use of fund balance be approved by representative town meeting. So while it's true that even if you approve this thing that I'm recommending about the 9% instead of the 10%, and it gets approved by town meeting and we go forward this way, the expectation is that the actual number of unassigned fund balance in July next year will be over 11% because of this assigned amount that will free up, right? It'll be over 11%, but it won't be available to you unless you ask for the permission to spend it in that FY23 budget and receive that permission from representative town meeting. It's exactly why I'm recommending that you go down to 9% on the set aside so that you do have the ability to use more fund balance for the purposes we're going to be talking a lot about in the weeks ahead. In this particular piece, this particular revenue, we tie to our investments in capital. And what is happening is you'd be in a situation where there would have to be some pretty substantial cuts or a larger than really necessary property tax increase in order to fund this proposed budget. If you agreed after we get all the way through this, that the expenses that are proposed here are responsible and you grab them and own them as your own to recommend to town meeting, then the question is, how do we fund those expenses? And it is right and proper and responsible to fund them with $250,000 worth of fund balance instead of $50,000 worth of fund balance and take that $200,000 worth of pressure off of the property taxes.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment or should Peter continue? Take it away, Peter.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
Are we gonna circle back for what you've covered already, or would you like more questions about what you've covered?
Actually, if you would bear with me for probably 15 minutes,
Yeah.
I think I can hit everything. What I want to do, and I don't have to, but it's what we usually do, and I think it's helpful. I want to go now through that. We've done the really hard, deep dive, complicated, unusual thing. So I'd like to do the normal thing now and just call out category by category, sort of what's up and what's down to give everybody sort of the framework within which, the broader framework within which we'll have the very specific discussions over the next couple of months.
Thank you.
That works. I think I can do that in about 15 minutes and then we can talk some more about it or not tonight, or just save the discussions for when we go into the deeper, more explicit conversations. That totally at your discretion. Okay.
Hey, Peter, carry on.
So the other categories, moving beyond property taxes and use of fund balance. The other categories of revenue include the rooms and meals tax, from which we collect about $400,000. We had been collecting well over $400,000. This one declined very substantially at the beginning of COVID. It has crept back up, but just a little. So we're conservatively estimating $395 as the FY23 revenue from this source. It's an increase of $10,000 over FY22. The sales tax, as I mentioned, is doing better than we had originally predicted. We think that's primarily, but maybe not exclusively, because of internet sales that were just starting to show up in the state's records that we used in projecting what we thought this revenue source would yield. We originally estimated $630,000 a year. In the very first year, it was over 800. We've had a couple of years now of, well over 800 and then well over 900. So we are proposing $950,000 for this line item of revenue, which is $125,000 increase. That's worth a penny, a little over a penny on the tax rate, all by itself. And it's reliable revenue. This past fiscal year, the fiscal year that closed on June 30th, 2021, we collected $953,000 of sales tax revenue. So what this represents is the expectation of staying steady. We think that that's a responsible projection. Based on recent growth, we might reasonably expect that it would continue to grow. Solid waste revenues are those that come in from bag sales and sales of recycling and compost containers. We expect that revenue source to remain stable at $307,000. The transfer from other funds is a payment that's made from the utility fund to the general fund and from the parking fund to the general fund. It acknowledges that there are services provided, particularly but not exclusively, by the administrative employees of the town that are in support of the utility operations. Most of the operations employees within our utility functions and our parking functions are paid directly out of those funds. There are some field services that are also provided in support of those two utilities or enterprises, I should say. And so in any event, there is a formula that is applies percentages of the different functional areas that provide support to the two enterprise funds. And we apply that to the budget and it increases incrementally as the budget increases. The expectation this year is a modest increase of about $7,000 to a total of about $353,000 of transfer from those two funds into the general fund. I'm going to skip over the use of fund balance because we've talked about it plenty. There's finally the catch-all of other revenue. In other revenue, we're seeing a pretty substantial increase this year, almost a penny and a half, $162,000. The equivalent, I should say, of a penny and a half, right? This is money that would otherwise have to be collected in taxes, but it's coming in from other sources. $55,000 of this is the increase in the premiums that are paid by the employees, contributions to the town that we then pay out to Blue Cross. $45,000 of additional town clerk fees based on the rate increase that was done a year ago. And $40,000 in penalties and interest, increased penalties and interest on delinquent taxes. That's a temporary increase, not a permanent increase. That's a blip. That's going to be a COVID related increase in revenue. That's unfortunate. And we expect and certainly hope will disappear as we go forward into future years when there is a lower amount of delinquent taxes and therefore a lower amount of penalties and interest when it's paid. I'm done with revenues and going to move on into expenditures, if that's okay.
Super.
So in staffing, we are proposing a larger than normal increase of 4.2% or $332,000. The cause of that is twofold. One is the fact that in the recent negotiation of the collective bargaining agreements, we settled contracts with all four unions, and in some of those, there was not just like an incremental raise, but some corrective action that we took to address inequities in our pay system and make the pay system more equitable, both within unions and across the unions, across the full team of town employees. And so this budget reflects the increased cost of those additional salaries. In addition, out of the $330,000 or so of total increased costs for staffing, there's about $100,000 of it, about $95,000 of it that is in two positions that I'm proposing be created. I know that we will need to have a lot of discussion about these items. It is rare for us to create new town employee positions, and they come at not just a this year's cost, but a continuing cost to the budget. I think we should save the deeper dive into each of these until when we are addressing the departmental budgets within which they will reside. So one of them is an evidence technician, a civilian evidence technician position for the police department that we would discuss on November 23rd with Chief Hardy. And the other is a human resources assistant that we would discuss with Sally Nix on November 30th. I think I said November 30 with Chief Hardy. I meant to say November 23rd.
Yeah, you said it right.
November 23rd with Chief Hardy, November 30th with Sally Nix. I want you to know that I've been thoroughly, multiple times through these recommendations with those two department heads and with other town staff. And we've worked on this together and at some depth. And I'm recommending to you, I believe both of these positions are needed and beneficial, and we'll be able to explain in great detail why. I just think it's important that we have that detailed conversation with the two department heads, each in their turn as part of their departmental discussions. the employee benefits area of town expense, which does represent in this proposed budget 18%. It's been pretty consistent up in that 16 to 18% range of total town expenses for a number of years now. The total figure is $3.6 million worth of expense for town employee benefits. The vast majority of that is in the health insurance program. And we talked earlier tonight about what's happening with that. We are having a difficult renewal, but one where we feel like we did what could be done to contain the amount of that cost increase. So overall, for budgetary purposes, it's an increase in this category of $191,000 or 5.6%. And the reason it's 5.6 instead of a higher number is because there are other employee benefits that are paid through this that are more static. So there's some incremental increases in Social Security and contributions to the retirement system, the state retirement system on behalf of the employees, and a few other benefits. But because those are more static, those soften the impact of the 8.8% increase in the cost of the health insurance program. The news is exactly the opposite under the category risk management, where we're seeing the benefits of several years of some really concentrated work. It began before Sally arrived as our HR director, but she has significantly increased the attention that we're paying, took some steps that we had initiated prior to her arrival and really made them stronger and more ongoing in terms of how we are addressing safety and reducing the amount of injuries that town employees are having, and then also how we manage claims and work with employees to get them back to work sooner, which has been demonstrated repeatedly to be better for the employee in addition to less expensive for the employer. It's just not good for folks to be out of work recovering. It's better for them to be back in the workplace doing what they're able to do as they recover from an injury. And so both of those things, reducing the number and severity of injuries and working with people to come back to work sooner, has had a really positive impact on our workers' compensation costs. And this year is resulting in a $105,000 decrease in the workers' compensation budget. Department expenses is the place where we spend money through the departments related to purchasing services and items that are outside of the things we've been talking about already, outside of pay and benefits and other operating costs. These are supplies of various types and contracted services of various types. The category is showing a significant increase this year, but almost half of the amount of that increase is the $100,000 allocation to the Community Safety Fund, which is showing up in department expenses instead of in salaries in the police department. So it's showing up in the police department as an expense from that budget to the Community Safety Fund, and showing in the summary as a department expense. We also are seeing another significant increase, and we'll continue to see these over the next couple of years until we do have a stormwater utility in place. The general fund budget will continue to bear the burden of increased stormwater management costs, and the proposed amount for this coming year's budget is $27,300 above where we've already been. We'll talk about it on Public Works Night. We'll talk about the detailed numbers, but I believe we've gone from on the order of $20,000 a year to now over $100,000 a year just in the last couple of years, just in 2 or 3 years time with increases. There was one year when it would increase by over $60,000 just in 1 year, and a couple of other years when it's increased by this $25,000 or $30,000, all because of increasingly stringent regulations that the state has imposed on public drainage, particularly municipal drainage by roadways, but also other public drainage systems. And so we are on top of that in terms of compliance, and it's costing a significant amount of additional funding. Also in the increase for department expenses, there is a $25,000 one-time expense that is proposed for a strategic planning process at the fire department. I had actually originally planned to propose that that be funded with fund balance because it's a one-time expense. You know the story about fund balance, so it's just kind of in the mix of things. I'm now proposing that what you do settle on an amount of fund balance to be used for this budget, it simply be allocated to capital transfer. That's an appropriate use of it, and we don't need to address this more nuanced use of it as a one-time expense, but it means that this one-time expense will be borne by the general revenues of the general fund. And also within the fire department, there's a new line item of $10,000 for medical supplies related to the services that are provided by our firefighters to folks on medical related calls. The legal category is proposed to go down slightly. It's ever so slightly of about $2,700 from about 118,000 to just shy of 116,000. So that's basically flat. Those are the expenses that we pay for the retainer for Bob Fisher's services as town attorney and for some related expenses. The human services budget is shown differently this year than we have in the past. I think better, frankly. It's something we hadn't thought to do until we realized this year we needed to do it because of the change in the way this is being funded. So what we have done previously every year is just bring over last year's allocations and show them again in this year's proposed budget. And then sometimes that gets approved that way. More often it gets modified, first by the advisory committee of RTM and then by RTM itself. And then, we have another year of sort of the same iteration going on after that. This year is the first year of having an actual amount of money that RTM directed be allocated to this part of the budget. And it is not exactly the same amount as last year. It is in fact calculated by using the direction that we received from RTM. It's 1.4% of last year's total budget. And so that's a known number, a calculable number, and it is $275,576. So what we've done in that part of the budget is zeroed out all of the particular agencies. We still list them, those that have received funding in the last few years, so you can see the history of the funding that they've received. But for this year, we're showing zero for every individual agency, and we're showing an overall allocation to that purpose at $275,576. The solid waste expenses are essentially flat. There are elements of this. This is what we pay for collection and disposal of recycling, collection and disposal of garbage. Same thing for compost. Our assessment to the regional solid waste district and a few related expenses. This is where we actually pay to buy the bags and the containers that we sell to the users of the system to make the revenue that we talked about a few minutes ago. And so while some things are up and some things are down, the net of that for this particular category is coming out to be just about flat for this from FY22 to FY23. A change of only about $1,000 in an $896,000 part of our budget. For capital projects this year, I'm proposing the transfer of $562,000 from the general fund to the capital fund for these purposes. And the capital discussions will be occurring on the 16th, 2 weeks from tonight. And I know there are some members of the public who intend to address the select board about some elements of this. So I'm not going to go into great detail about why tonight, but I will just flag what's in here and how it relates to last year. So $400,000 for street paving is what you approved last year and what went through and was approved at town meeting and is actually in the FY22 budget. It is an increase over prior years, but not a further increase on top of last year. $120,000 for sidewalk replacement is a $20,000 proposed increase over last year's funding of $100,000 in order to address more sidewalk replacement needs faster. $12,000 for bicycle infrastructure is intended to be a match for a grant that we will ask for your permission to apply for. to implement. You're about to see at one of these next couple of select board meetings, you'll be seeing the report of the scoping study related to creating bike lanes coming into town from exit 2 of I-91. The first part of that, we believe once you've seen the presentation, we hope you will agree. We have concluded so far in our review, staff and the other folks who have participated in the review, that it is relatively simpler to agree on a plan and implement it to come from exit 2 along Western Avenue to the intersection with High Street and Green Street. And it will be relatively more complicated to go down High Street into all the way to Main Street. Just based on the concentration of the use of that space and the parking that occurs on both sides of the road through that segment. And so what we're proposing here is the $12,000 would be a match for a grant that would enable us to implement what we're viewing as phase 1 of this from exit 2 to the Green Street High Street intersection, with the idea that whatever might get supported as the way forward on the High Street portion would be pursued as a phase 2 some other time. And finally, for capital projects, $30,000 to replace the fire alarm system at Brooks Memorial Library, which is needed. It's been malfunctioning. It's required actually a bunch of service calls. So there's actually it's one of those examples we've talked a lot about over the last several years of, getting out ahead of something so that we don't nurse it along and pay a lot of money just to keep it functioning. This one, is an example, unfortunately, of one that has begun to fail on us, and it's an essential safety feature. So we need to spend $30,000 and replace the fire alarm system. I won't go item by item through the equipment. This will be the second year that we are implementing our planned scheduled replacement on a 25-year schedule. The total of what is recommended for this year is $839,000 worth of replacement. The list that's on page 8 of the budget message tells you not only how much is allocated to each different item, each piece of equipment, but also for those that are replacing a particular individual piece of equipment rather than just applying towards the expense of a category of replacement. We identify the age of the equipment that's being replaced. There are different schedules of replacement for different pieces of equipment. So like a grader or a fire truck might last 20 years or more, whereas a small vehicle might only last 5 to 7 years. And the dump trucks typically are on a 10-year replacement cycle. So give you kind of a framework, a feel for how we spread these costs out as evenly as possible over a 25-year period. By switching to this planned methodical replacement schedule, we are limiting the average annual increase of equipment replacement costs between now and fiscal year 47, 25 years off, to about $19,000 average annual increase, or 1.8% of this particular cost within the budget. And long-term planning and stable funding will provide greater certainty and transparency for the taxpayers, maintain a more up-to-date fleet of vehicles and other capital equipment, reduce our maintenance costs because we are replacing things before they fully wear out. And because of that, it's increasing trade-in value. When we, particularly on vehicles, when we're trading in a vehicle to buy the next one, we're getting better value for what we're trading in, helping to reduce the long-term cost of those replacements. The budget also includes, for the first time, a $70,000 transfer to the fossil fuel-free facilities fund. So among the group of transfers out from the general fund to other purposes, the FFFFF will start showing up on an annual basis in this budget. And is it an additional cost? This year, it's an additional cost. You may choose to change the amount in future years, but this year, because we're going from 0 to 70,000, it's a 3/4 of a penny or a 2/3 of a penny impact to the operating budget. And our debt service is going down. It's going down by more than usual. It usually decreases just a little bit each year. because our principal amount stays the same and our amount of interest each year goes down incrementally over time. This year, we actually are receiving one of those, greater benefits that happens occasionally when an item has been fully paid back. And so it drops off entirely, the principal and the interest. The Honeywell HVAC system, the control system here in the municipal center that was implemented, I believe about 15 years ago, was on a long-term lease of $126,000 a year. And the final payment is being made this fiscal year, FY22. So in FY23, it drops off the books, and that leads to contributes substantially to $149,000 decrease in the cost of debt service next year versus this year, which is an almost 12% decrease in that cost for town government. And the other expenses category that catches anything that isn't falling neatly into one of the other categories is decreasing this year by $37,000. That's primarily because this is where the website and community engagement upgrade showed up in the last year's or the current year's budget. So that was $75,000. We are proposing the $15,000 of funding for the online permitting system shows up here in this category. And there are some incremental increases in existing line items. And so they partially offset the $75,000 that will not be reappearing because it was spent, is being spent on this year's project for the website and community engagement upgrade. And the net of that is a $37,000 decrease in this category of expenditure townwide. The last thing that I plan to say tonight, that's everything about the numbers. I just want to remind the public, because I know that you all are well aware and have previously approved the schedule, that we will be meeting every Tuesday night for the remainder of November and much of December and on into January to deal with the details of this budget, along with twice a month dealing with the other business items that the select board needs to address as part of just overseeing town government. But every Tuesday night in November and at least the first couple of Tuesday nights in December, we will be addressing budget matters. And that will begin next week when we will review in detail all the revenues of the town, all the different line items of revenue, and the public works proposed expenditures and recreation and parks proposed expenditures. Thank you.
Peter, thank you very much. Daniel, did you have a comment?
Yeah, a question actually. So Yoshi will be joining the town in early December to work alongside you.
Yes.
Will he come to these meetings?
Yes, I certainly hope so.
I should hope so too. I guess in what capacity would he be coming to those meetings?
Yeah, no, I anticipate that Yoshi and I will be doing most of our work together throughout December. And that over the course of December, I'll be doing less and watching more, and he'll be watching less and doing more. You have hired someone who is capable of doing this work, well qualified for it. What I'm going to help him do is get acclimated to Brattleboro and the details of how we function now here, so that he's well prepared to move on with you in January to make the decisions about how we're going to function in the future.
Great, thank you.
Does anyone else have any comments that they want to make this evening, or do we want to wait and digest this? Ian?
I'd love to wait and digest this and move through each week. I just want to thank Peter very much for the in-depth review. And I do think that this is a really important part of this. Just have one night of where we just look at it on a very broad 1,000-foot view, and then we get into it in further weeks. So thank you, Peter.
Welcome. Thank you.
Okay, well, again, our thanks to Peter. Did I see a hand?
Tim made a grumble.
I'm just wondering, I mean, I'm sorry about my voice. I'd be happy with just letting it all settle in, but I have a couple of questions I'm not sure are going to be appropriate when we're taking the deep dive. So I'm just trying to figure out what is the best way, because one question in particular will color my impression of all of our meetings going forward. Does anybody else understand that?
I feel like you should just ask these questions. These are big T's right now.
So a quick statement and then a quick question for Peter, and hopefully it's not too much of a zinger because it's feeling very late. You know, with all of that unassigned and assigned and real time, and that's a new term, it's a lot to take in. But I feel that my bosses, our constituents, want to know mainly two things. How much are my taxes going to go up? And what am I getting for that? So I'm trying to just step back, because this is the moment to step back, and then we dive in. And then towards the end of the process, we step back again and argue the whole thing out. Sometimes I've learned over the years that when you leave all your big questions for the end, they get dominated by the smaller questions. So that's sort of why I wanted to just kind of throw this out there. And I think the only one that I can't sort of deal with going forward is this question of the 9%. And I've got the institutional memory of hearing Peter year after year, to your credit, by the way, defend the guideline, I'm going to call it, of 10% remaining unassigned fund balance. Here's my question, and hopefully it's not the zinger. Peter, if going down to 9% this year is not irresponsible due to the strange position we're in, where the refilling of assigned fund balance on July 1st will happen in a way, tell me why going down to 8% is irresponsible.
8% is taking more risk. I wouldn't call it irresponsible. It's still within the realm, but just barely, of that amount of what I'm referring to as excess prepaid expenses, for lack of a better term. So, you know, we know, and I can tell you exactly, but I would have to look into the papers, so I'm not going to say it exactly, but we know that on the order of $450,000 is the total amount of those excess prepaid expenses that create this unusual circumstance.
Right. And the 1% represents roughly $200,000.
Exactly right. Just shy, like $198,000, $199,000. So call it 200. Going down to 9 means you free up $200,000, but you have the security of knowing that there's $300,000 or $250,000 that you're not doing that with. And that's what creates the expectation that next July 1st, the actual unassigned fund balance will be north of 11%, even though you'll be making a decision now for the purposes of creating this budget that you're only setting aside 9% of what is unassigned fund balance right now. If you went all the way to 8% and used $400,000 of additional fund balance, you'd be reducing the margin of error in case something does go wrong later in the year. You know, a very bad winter with lots of extra expenses, or, you know, a particular storm that causes a lot of damage, or some other kind of unexpected situation. You'd be reducing the margin of error on this adjustment. And while that is you know, what is your appetite for risk kind of a question, you would be concretely reducing the amount of assigned fund balance that will free up as unassigned fund balance next July 1st, which in the example you're saying, but using 400,000 instead of 200,000, going to 8% instead of 9%, means about $50,000 that means I believe you would still be well south. I'd have to run those numbers, but I think you'd be well south of 10% on July 1st next year. And I would advise you not to be that bold. We can do some work together. We've got weeks ahead of us to be working through this. And if you're inclined to do more or less as I've recommended, but maybe not at the 9% figure, and if there are others of you that would like to see what the math looks like to maybe be a little bolder, we can run some numbers for you and show you where that breakoff point is, where you would still be able to look the public in the eye and say, our reasonable expectation is next July 1st, we will be adhering to the 10%. And then what that does is frees up somewhere between 1% and 2%, somewhere, let's say maybe around $150,000 of additional on top of the 200.
Okay, well, thank you for that, because that, having not asked that question, I was definitely going to be colored by that nagging feeling when especially because you're proposing something with major new expenses that will be major new ongoing expenses. So I just wanted to be fair to those individual pieces of the process by just asking that. I had a couple others, but I don't think they're really that influential for me personally. And they can be answered along the way. So thank you.
Daniel.
So will we see those projections, that math?
Yeah, so
Can we? I mean, I don't think there's any harm in it. And I think other people will have similar questions.
Yep, I totally agree. So we'll run it. I think I saw nodding, as Tim was raising that and I was answering it. So in any event, it's information for you to consider at this point. It's not steering in one direction or another. So we will just prepare it. We should have that for you for next Tuesday's meeting.
Great.
Does anyone else have any nagging questions that they can't live with until next week?
Any public?
How about the public? Are the public good for next week? Ready to absorb all that they've heard this evening? I'm going to take that as a yes, because I don't see any little hands. So there's no action to be taken. So there's only one action remaining for us other than to thank Peter again and the town staff for all their efforts. And I await a motion. Jessica.
Okay.
Jessica muted.
Somebody else do it.
There we go.
I know you're good. You're good.
I move that we adjourn.
Great. Jessica has moved to adjourn. All select board members in favor, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Good night and thank you, everyone.
Good
Thanks,
night.
everybody. Thanks, BCTV.